with all due respect.
Hey, we're Josh Ortegan and Grey Gaines, and this is With All Due Respect, the show where we keep it real about health, fitness, and performance. From weight loss to sports development, we're covering the conversations that matter.
Follow us on Instagram at Phenom Fitness, PHNM Fitness, and visit www.phenomfit.com to check out our training programs, coaching, and gear built for real results. Let's get into it.
All right, we are here again with all due respect, Josh and Grey. We are building on our series that has become a very popular series, I feel.
Yeah,
Uh,
it has.
the state of youth sports. We kind of did it on a whim, and it's built into a pretty long series. And today I think is a very important one. I think not just for athletes, but I think it's going to be very important for parents of athletes that we see or we talk to that follow us, that interact with us, to build some perspective on what's going on from the mental health side of youth sports and college sports. And we have Dr. Rhea Merck. And I promise that's the first and only time I'll call you Dr. Rhea Merck. I like that you're like, call me Ray. And I'm like, well, I'm always so I want to be always so respectful. She is the clinical sports psychologist for the Gamecocks, South Carolina Gamecocks here in South Carolina. And she has her own practice. And I want to thank you again for coming on. I'll be honest, I was a little bit nervous to call you and get in
Really?
touch with it. Yeah, and I know I got referred because I'm like, oh, she's so busy. And but what I found from our conversation was you're really committed to building awareness around the mental health. Do we call it an epidemic? We kind of talked about how it's kind of built a lot uh, in youth sports, high school, college, youth sports. And our conversation we had leading up to this was this is something you're very passionate about and you want to get this out to people. And that's what made me feel
Absolutely.
like oh my gosh, okay, let's bring her on. This is going to be great. Um, First, can you just kind of introduce yourself, who you are, what you do, uh, what even got you into this, and we can kind of build on our conversation from here. What inspired you?
Sure. Well, thank you,
Yes,
first of
ma'am.
all, for having me. And I want to say, too, that this is really timely because May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And so, what a great way to kick it off, even for you all. I just had to get that plug in there. But you're right, I'm passionate about mental health. I was an undergrad here at USC and went to work in mental health right out of the gate in a very poorly paid position, I might add, and worked there with tremendous opportunities and great people for a long time. And then I went to graduate school. Now, I have to tell you that sports psychology was never on my radar, although the university where I got my PhD, the University of North Texas, now has a huge sports psychology training program. And that started, there was a young faculty member that came in when I was just before I left. And it was clear that he wanted to steer the department in that way. So that's cool. Um, but how did I get into this? So I've had a private practice here in Columbia since the mid 90s. And in the mid 2000s, I left full time practice and came back to the university and worked in the counseling center for about 6 years. Then I left the counseling center and I was teaching in the Department of Psychology for, it was a total of 10 years, but partway through that, one of my colleagues who actually got me the teaching job and had a part time practice in my office, tragically just dropped dead and it was horrible. She was wildly popular with all the students, and anyway, long and short story is the psychiatrist who worked here in athletics reached out to me. He and I had known each other in the community, but also when I was at the counseling center, I worked with a number of their student athletes, and he and I had worked together on some of them. So he reached out and said, we need you. And I said, I'm not a sports psychologist. And he said, doesn't matter. We need someone who has an area of expertise in eating disorders, which has always kind of been my thing because of my first job. And he said, and we need someone who knows college students. And you've worked with athletes before. So I was like, okay. So I was a contract employee I contracted with athletics very part time from about 2015 until the summer of 2021 when they brought me on in a full time capacity. So that's how I got here.
Our original conversation we had, and after our conversation, I kind of changed the focus of what I wanted to talk about, was originally about eating disorders. And
Correct.
after our conversation, I was like, well, man, this is such a more of a broad topic than just eating disorders and
Mhm.
the issue with eating disorders in young athletes. And we can touch on it, but after our conversation, I was like, no, I think it's a little bit more I think people want to hear, not everybody has a son or a daughter that's going to have an eating disorder if they're in high school athlete or a college athlete, but they're going to face some mental struggle. So I want to like broaden it. After our conversation
Yeah.
got me to broaden it. But you said what you did previously was with eating disorders, but I want to be like, oh no, I feel like this after our conversation, it's a lot bigger than that. There's a
Hmm.
much bigger conversation from that. Um, in the years, and it could be since you've been full time, what do you see are some of the most pressing issues in mental health with our young athletes to our college athletes? Are there certain issues that you're seeing that have stood out the most in your career or in the last recent 4 years?
Right, right. So the number one problem that most athletes face is some form of anxiety, how to manage, their nerves or their butterflies or whatever they want to call it. And it relates oftentimes to external pressures, whether it's pressures from coaches, pressures from parents, sometimes particularly in youth sports, but that's really the most critical thing that sort of drives people into our doors. And so there's performance anxiety, so it may fall on the performance side, but the bottom line about anxiety is that anxiety is anxiety is
Hmm.
anxiety.
Hmm.
And so whether it's performance related or pressures from other people that translates into performance, or for college students, sometimes it's my relationship has gone awry.
Hmm.
And, I get to the practice field or pool or whatever it may be, and I just can't get it off my mind. And it's slowing me down, it's interfering with my ability to concentrate. So, it really doesn't matter if it's the personal or the performance. A lot of the strategies are very simple on how to focus, how to manage your energy, that sort of thing.
Would
So
Yeah.
would you
anxiety is undoubtedly number
Anxiety.
one.
Okay.
would you say that there's a difference between female and male athletes and what you deal with on a regular basis and how their anxieties are different, or maybe what their anxieties are focused on or what it stems from?
Um, there always is pressure to perform, and that
Right.
doesn't matter whether you're a male athlete or a female athlete. The pressure to perform is always there.
Hmm.
Um, the thing that's really also changed the landscape in the last couple of years is the added pressure of social media and NIL, the name, image, likeness stuff in collegiate sports. So while that affects collegiate sports, there is a little bit of a trickle down effect because, parents used to talk about, can you get on this collegiate team? Can you play? Can you get scholarship? Can you get a full scholarship? Are you going to be able to perform at this level so that, our family can send you to the best school or whatever it may be?
Hmm. Hmm.
So, at the end of the day, I don't know that the pressures or the things that they bring in are any different sometimes. It's probably a lot of the same stuff.
Same. You know, as I think about this, I immediately went to a perspective from the coach.
Hmm.
And I think, okay, say I'm a coach and I'm just going to say soccer. Say I'm the girls soccer coach. I know nothing about it, but I'm just using an example.
Right.
And I'm dealing with athletes that, yeah, they have performance anxiety, but all of a sudden they're bringing their relationships into practice. Like they're worried about her boy. You know, as a coach, you can kind of be like, wait, she's not, she's having problems because of her boy. Like we're trying to win
No,
games.
but let me be clear. The coaches don't typically know that.
So they haven't,
They
okay.
don't know.
That's a great
They,
thing. That's a great thing. Yeah. And if I'm a coach, I
yeah,
don't know how to handle that. I just know I'm
right.
supposed to, they're hired me to win games.
Mhm.
Right. And I'm looking at this kid and I see that something's not right, So
Yes.
the coaches can identify that something's going on oftentimes. But I'll be honest with you, the kids are too scared to share that stuff. They have to have a really close relationship with the coach to really
Mhm.
level with them because, there's this whole philosophy of I can't have any problems, right? If
Mhm.
I have any problems, then I'm weak, and coach will identify me as weak and I'll be out. I won't get playing time. So coaches
Mhm.
are not who they're confiding in, which
Okay.
is
Right.
what makes the mental health providers so important.
I was gonna
Now
say,
they
as a
may,
coach,
mhm,
I wouldn't know how to handle that.
The coach to me is like your
mhm,
boss too. It's not like I
right,
would go to my boss and explain
No.
all of these issues in a corporate world if I don't have that relationship with my boss. So
exactly.
100% the value of having
Yeah.
Hmm.
someone else there to discuss that with.
Hmm. Hmm. Exactly. Now they might be calling parents and they might
Sure.
be talking to parents about it. But yeah, it's really helpful. And sometimes they think it's a performance problem and they come in and truly they are having performance problems, but it's all the other things in the anxiety bucket, as I call it.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. And you also spoke about how you guys specifically handle um I've never even thought I've said this on our podcast many times. If things about mental health are going to be on my shoulders, I'm the wrong person to talk to. Like, I've said that with Gray many times when we've had conversations around mental health. I'm like, I'm probably not that like I'm clueless, right? And
Right,
especially when it
right.
comes to athletes, because as a competitive coach, I'm like, hey, we just got to do what we got to do to win.
Hmm. Hmm.
And we start, and I think coaches have a tendency in the past, and probably still do, to not weigh in the mental side of it enough and just strictly focus on X's, O's, players, execution, win, next game.
Hmm.
And they
Hmm.
Do you,
don't focus on that. But what you brought up was that you guys have a mental health aspect of the basically a pre-participation screening.
Hmm.
Can you
Hmm.
talk about that? Because when you said that, I call it ignorance. I'm like, I've never thought about having that part of a,
What would that look like?
what would that
Right,
even
of
look like?
course. Hmm.
Yes.
Hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we have some questionnaires that they're standardized, and so we know what a significant score is. But there's one for depression, there's one for anxiety, there's one for eating disorders, there's one for substance use. We're also have incorporated a tool that's called the ACEs, which is Adverse Childhood Events scale, because the ACEs score highly correlates with mental health problems in adulthood. So these are things that happen to you in childhood. My family often didn't have enough money to eat, or the lights were turned off in our house, or I have a parent who's entangled in the legal system or in prison. It looks at all of these things, or my parent died when I was young. It looks at all these things that happen to kids that, they may rock along and look fine, but in adulthood, they develop problems. And so we've included that because it's informative, and it also assesses for trauma. So we've got a number of things like that on this questionnaire. And then, like I say, a few other questions like, are you on medication? Have you ever been hospitalized? Have you ever seen a therapist? That sort of thing.
Is there a way to think, have you ever looked through these and been like, we probably never would have caught this if we didn't have this? Like,
Absolutely.
yes, yes,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And so what we do for any student athlete that scores, in a significant range is we reach out to them personally at the beginning of the fall, and we start making phone calls, and we explain to them about our services, and we invite them in. And we have had students that have said, no, I think I'm good right now. Everything's fine. But they have a phone number and they know how to reach us. And, what happens sometimes is 2 months later, 4 months later, or in January, they pick up the phone or they text us, typically text us back and say, hey, I know it's been a while, but could I make a time to see you? And we are so thrilled when that happens. To me, that's a success.
Yeah. Or a parent reaches
Absolutely.
out and says, hey, Jimmy probably didn't tell you, but he's on the baseball team and we've been dealing with this, but he's a little bit embarrassed
Yes,
about it. We want to make you
yes.
available or aware of it because we don't think our son or our daughter will.
Right, right.
Right.
So they will do that sometimes, or if their daughter's previously been treated for an eating disorder, or their son is on the baseball team and, dad died 3 months ago. There are things like that that parents will reach out, or if kids have been in counseling for whatever reason, sometimes the parents will reach out to us. How do we get them hooked up with you?
Yeah. That's I really, there's a certain amount of bravery that comes with that,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Because everybody I do think since COVID, there's been a little bit more in our culture of, hey, this is real. Mental health is real. But still, there's a little bit, especially in the athlete environment, to be, I'm tough, I'm okay, I can do it, everything's on me
Same for
until,
guys too,
oh yeah,
for a
guy,
Oh,
male,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, for sure,
100%.
for sure. I don't want to do that because my team's good. Yeah, you said it earlier. I don't want them to think I'm weak,
Hmm.
Hmm.
and if my
Hmm.
coach thinks I'm weak, and that's a
Right.
scary place to be. I think that's a scary place to be.
Yeah, in some ways it is, but I think we're getting better and better at it.
Mhm,
We have people in the football spaces who are very much pro mental health,
mhm.
all the way from the top to the bottom. And so when people see someone who's in distress, they are not hesitant to, either pick up the phone and call us and say, hey, I want you to see this kid or talk to the kid or invite us down there. Same thing with baseball. I think there's really a growing shift about that. And I think the students have less and less stigma around mental health, and sometimes, we'll see them in the cafeteria or walking or wherever, and they'll go, hey, they'll say to their teammates, that's my therapist. And for me, as a therapist who also has a private practice, let me just say my private practice people, they see me and they're like turning
Hmm.
away and heading the other
That's
direction
funny.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
and don't want to be seen. I mean, we never approach people or call them out or anything, but the students are they have gotten pretty open about it. There've been a couple of things in the media where the student athlete has said, yeah, I'm doing a lot better. I'm less anxious before games because I've talked to my therapist about this. I don't want to call anyone out, but then there've been students who they did a profile on a student athlete here who'd gone through a series of injuries and about that student's recovery. And the student, said, I wouldn't have gotten through it without Dr. Merck. Like she was there, every step of the way with me on this. And
That's got
so
to help you sleep at night,
those
doesn't it?
things,
Yeah. That's got to help you
well,
sleep.
yeah.
You go home thinking like, I did my job today. I did a good, that's got to make you as a professional feel pretty encouraged by what you can do and the impact you have.
Yeah, But I also think that, sitting in here with them, we know when they're grateful and we know,
Yeah.
I mean, they're very, it's
Mhm.
it's such a personal kind of intimate relationship that you develop with someone when they're sharing their struggles. And so we know
Mhm.
they don't have to give the
No.
shout out by any means.
No,
Yeah.
if there's anything I've learned as somebody who's been in therapy before, um, most of the things I talk about, they already know.
Hmm.
They're smarter than me, right? Like right? I think I'm tricking them. I'm not, right? Right. I gave that up a
Right.
long time ago. Um,
Hmm.
I hope there are parents, athletes, friends that watch this and they might say, well, my kids plays high school sports and might go on to college sports. I think they're good. Maybe they're not.
Hmm.
What are some signs
Hmm.
that parents, friends, teammates can see or identify that maybe one of their sons, daughters, teammates, friends is struggling and could use some help? What are some signs they can see? And then another one, what is the best way for them to even help? Can they help?
Hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about that? What are signs? And then what can they do to help?
Right. So the signs we typically say are to look for changes in your kid. Have they usually been pretty social? Now they're isolating more. They were going and doing things with friends. Now they're in the room on their computer. Are there changes in their sleep? They're either sleeping a whole lot more or a whole lot less. Changes in their eating. Are they starting to eat a whole lot more? Are they, has eating dropped off and are they perhaps struggling in that way? Changes in mood, changes in irritability, particularly in boys. Sometimes depression in men doesn't look like depression in women, right? Men don't sit around crying, um, but they get irritable, right? They get cranky with people. They get, especially middle-aged men tend to sit in the recliner and run the remote, and that's about the extent of their interaction with the world. But for kids, it might be that they're on video games a whole lot more than they used to be. So looking for those changes in your child is really important and not to, this is like one of my pet peeves because I love working with teenagers, adolescents, young adults. And the problem is sometimes people go, oh, well, they're supposed to do that because they're just an angsty teenager, right? No, they don't have to be angsty teenagers. And if your child has never been an angsty teenager, maybe it's time to have a conversation with them.
Wow,
Like,
that's
hey,
really true. That
yeah.
that hits home for me because I hear parents say, "Oh, they're just, you know how it is when you're 15." And
Right. And so we
I
brush it off.
yeah, and I go,
Hmm.
"Yeah, you're kind of right." And I don't, because I'm not trained in this, but I can't tell
Hmm.
you how many times I have heard people be like, "Well, that's teenagers in their room all
Right.
the time on their phone." And what you're
Right.
saying is, no, it doesn't have to be that way. That's a sign.
It might not just be that. Right. Exactly. It could be a sign. I remember distinctly kind of early in my private practice, I worked with a lot of teenagers. And, the parents would say, well, my kid's not depressed. And I'm like, well, I gave your kid a depression test. And compared to other kids their age, your kid is way depressed. But here's the thing, and I get it. I mean, I'm a parent. My kids aren't young, but I'm a parent. And you want the best for your kid and so you see the best, oh well it's just a mood, not oh my kid could have a serious problem or my kid has enough of a problem that it's worth talking about. But I do think for parents especially with student athlete uh, kids, youth sport kids, what happens is the 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 sport becomes the family culture, right? And so it becomes the thing we do for fun, the thing we're obligated about, why we travel. It's all these things, right? And so pretty soon, here's the kid and here's the parent. I'm sorry, and here's the sport. So what I'm doing with my hands is your kid is here, but then the sport begins to cover up the kid behind the scenes, right? And all you see is the kid as the athlete, not the kid as your kid. And I mean, it's understandable. Parents are limited, they're stressed. You see your kid at practice, you might pick them up from there. At dinner revolves around, whatever the practice schedule is. And, God forbid if you have two of them, or even worse, if you have three. I have a colleague that has three kids playing
Yeah.
spring ball right now. And, they've got to be in two different places with three different kids and three different schedules, and there's only two parents in the
Yeah.
mix.
Yeah.
And
What
that's not
year?
an uncommon story.
Hmm.
Well, I think it's an
So then you,
interesting point too. We always like to think that exercise and sport is something that's very good for mental health, and it is. But I think it's a very
mhm,
important point to talk about your kid is still most likely to struggle in some way with some kind of mental health experience, even as an athlete. So reminding parents
mhm.
that like that's not going to mask anything deeper that's going on.
Right, right, exactly. And it used to be the research showed that s- participating in sport was kind of a protective factor
Right.
for mood
Hmm.
problems, but the recent research isn't holding that up. So has it been since the pandemic? Isolation was endemic to that, and isolation is, a breeding ground for mood problems and anxiety problems. So,
Hmm.
are we just dealing with the aftermath of that still?
Yeah.
And it hasn't changed how we function as families?
You bring up two things that have been a constant in this state of youth sports. One, parents, I don't want to use the word allow because it's not like they're allowing it, but parents starting to have their kids form their identity. I love this. I love the hand thing you did.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that is a great visual. And in case you're listening to it, one hand in front of the other, where the sport covers up the identity of the kid, and now the kid's identity is based around their sport.
Mm-hmm.
That is a
Mm-hmm.
constant we're hearing from people talk about. Um, your kid's whole identity is no longer as your child. It becomes my kid. Who is he? Oh, he's the baseball player,
Right. Right.
and
He's the
that's
pitcher.
he's the pitcher,
Mm-hmm.
and that's fleeting.
Mm.
The other
Mm-hmm.
one you talked about was the change in the family dynamic as soon as kids get involved. My son's friend's mother had a conversation with me. It was a 5-minute conversation. They were talking about the pull to be more involved in travel sports for their 9-year-old. And she goes, I just feel like all of that just messes with our family dynamic. Like, do we have to be gone all the weekend, traveling all over the place, going to sport? Like, what about the other things that are a part of our family? And I was
Right.
so like, I'm so glad she said that. Like parents
Mm-hmm.
are waking up and going like, no, that messes with our family dynamic. We're not
Mm-hmm.
going to spend 12
Mm-hmm.
weekends in a row in a hotel for my 9-year-old to play
Well,
a baseball tournament.
Well, and what about the expense? I mean, when
Oh,
my
oh,
kids were young, there was no
no,
way our family could have managed that, period.
Yeah.
So you played your school sport, and we also had our kids play music,
Hmm.
yes,
and
yeah,
because that was part of our family value. And sorry, we're not doing the club
no.
sport thing.
And that brings on two levels of stress. One, I read a report recently, a study recently that said kids know the money their parents are spending. They know. They're not, they understand. The more money spent on sports, the more performance anxiety the child feels.
Hmm.
But then you got to look at it as a parent to keep up with the Joneses. We have to spend how much this year? It's $15,000.
It's
And now the
crazy,
parent
right?
feels that stress too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I was gonna say
Right.
from personal experience too, like it puts a lot of stress on your marriage. And I went through that
Mm-hmm.
as a kid. My parents are separated now, and a big part of their separation was a lot of it was dedicated to the kids. And not a lot was left of their marriage. And I think that's a very
Right,
interesting point as
Ah,
well from the family
right.
dynamic.
yeah.
Right. So I
Mm.
also practice marriage and family therapy. I do a lot of couples work and in my private practice, and a lot of my training is in that area. And we always we always ask people, what's the number one relationship in a family? And people have a tendency to say the mother-child relationship. No, it's the husband-wife relationship is the number one. And there was I can't remember now who it was, but there was an author who said children are born into the marriage, and it's
Hmm.
the marriage that sustains the children, and that's
Hmm.
absolutely true, you know and it's beautiful, but parents feel so guilty, oh my gosh, well, we have to leave them, or we can't make this 59th practice this season because we
Yeah.
would like to have a date night. I'm like, freaking go on your date night. Like, that's the best
Your
thing you
kid
could
will be
probably
okay.
do, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think this, go ahead, Josh.
But no, go ahead. I'm
Just thinking
agreeing.
you're
Yeah,
marinating.
I'm going to church over here with this stuff. Yeah, I love it.
Oh, I knew that one of the things that we wanted to talk about was having that supportive environment around children. I knew that was a big question that we did want to speak on. So, what do you think are some strategies or some tips or some pointers of how we can create these environments for kids becoming adults, or maybe from the high school athlete going to the college athlete, or even just for the family environment?
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I think it depends on your family values,
Mm-hmm.
which sounds kind of corny and old-fashioned, but we get a lot of kids down here, and their parents were collegiate athletes, D1 athletes, and the family has a culture of participating in sport, and that's what we do. And when we have a holiday, we all go on a run, or we take vacations to go climbing or skiing or whatever it is. And if that's your family value, great. Chances are your kid will be the one who is able to make it into D1 sports. But there's a ton of them that do not, regardless of how much of that you pour in. And even if you make it into D1 sports, and which we could do about three whole podcasts on how college sports are changing right now. But that doesn't guarantee they're even going to get a scholarship. And so if you're not that family, what are your other values? So my family, it was we like to spend time outdoors. We like to camp. My husband at the time played music, and so my children played music. And so all of those things were important. So the rule in our family, or the value in our family, was you have to do a musical thing, and it didn't have to be music, it had been some other creative thing, but you also have to do something that keeps you active. So one of them danced and one of them played sports.
If you're a parent right now and you have a kid who wants to get involved in sports, and say you're a parent that never played sports, right?
Hmm.
And what kind of advice would you give a parent who's at the very beginning of navigating the sports? I don't care if they just play in high school, middle school, or they do go off to college. What advice would you give a parent who's watching this podcast and they're like, man, my kid's starting to really get involved in all of these sports and they're getting pretty serious and the coaching's kind of getting serious.
Hmm.
I need to make sure that I'm doing the right thing by my kid. I know you said it's kind of about their personal values, but as a parent, what is their role in navigating this process, if that some of that makes sense?
Well, I think it still goes back to don't lose sight of your child as who they are as a
Hmm.
human. And part of that comes out of this collegiate setting in which, everyone at some point is going to stop doing their sport, right? I avoid the Q word like the plague, right? We don't quit. But at some point, you stop doing your sport, and you don't know when that's going to be. It could be, I mean, lately with changing landscape of college sports, it's been roster limits, so people have gotten cut. It's almost the rare student athlete that we have here that doesn't experience some type of injury. So maybe it's a season ending or a career ending injury that takes you out. Or maybe you want to pick a major that at some point I can't do sport and do this major, like education. You cannot go do your student teaching if you're a college athlete because you can't make it to practice that way. And so, and there's students that want to be an international business, and at some point you have to study abroad. And so, unless you're in a sport that lets you have the summer off, you can't do that. So at some point, or you're going to graduate, right? And you're in a sport that, I don't know, let's pick something like pole vaulting. Most people don't play golf, you can play tennis, you can run, you can swim. You can join some, local team to play soccer, whatever. Chances are you're not going to play football though, if you're not going to the NFL. So at some point, this sport career and competing is likely to end. And what else do you have?
We see that common theme, I think, of
That's
finding
another common theme.
identity
Yep.
outside of your particular sport. And I I'm very grateful, I think, for my personal experience through my family. It was kind of the same way that you raised your kids. It was, we want you to play sports, but if you choose
Hmm.
not to, you're going to do some kind of athletic club or an academic club, or you're going to go learn to play guitar. There's something that you're going to find joy in that
Right.
is outside of the house
Yeah.
every
Yep.
time. And
Yeah.
I'm very
Yep.
grateful for that because I think it's something I carried with me and still carry with me,
Yeah.
years and years later.
Right. Right. It's really important to know how to have an interest that you can become absorbed in,
Hmm.
where you
Mm.
can just kind of lose yourself. And that's something that I think a lot of adults leave behind, and yet it's critically important. What is your thing?
Yeah.
So I often say the hardest clients I have to work with are the ones that say, well, I get up, I go to work, I come home, I watch TV, I go to bed, I rinse and repeat
Ooh.
every day. Well, what are
Yeah.
your hobbies? I don't really have any. Do you read? No. Do you, go places, do things? No, I just go home and watch TV. And I'm like, ooh, okay, now I
Well,
got nothing to work with this person.
I tell you, that segues into my next question. Technology,
Hmm.
Hmm.
mental health. Um, you could talk about this with your everyday out of practice person that's just normal society, or you can talk about this with athletes. How have you seen things like technology, uh, social media? Um, how do you see that starting to more and more influence mental health and athletes? And you can even not even talk about athletes. You could take this and talk about all of us.
Sure.
How
I
have you
mean, I
seen that
think,
social media affect?
yeah. So with the athletes in particular, it adds another layer of pressure, right? Because you have how mom and dad are handling, I always feel bad for the kickers, right?
Mhm.
It's that last critical moment. This kick that they're going to make is going to make or break the win or the loss, right? Now, my perspective on that is, well, it wouldn't all be hinging on you if everybody else had done their job up to this point. So it's not just you, right? But you can't talk them out of it in the moment.
Hmm.
And so then you've got now what social media has done is opened up the avenue for people to comment on that. And so, now this kid not only has to face fans, but face the very critical voices that start to happen on social media. And I'm pretty sure it was Simone Biles who said, well, hey, you come and do what I do, right? Like, if you want to be critical for me for stepping out of the Olympics because I had the twisties or whatever, why don't you step into my place and come do it? Because the average couch potato sitting there commenting negatively is not able to do what she does, right? And so it just adds a layer of pressure and criticism. I mean, oftentimes we have to help student athletes really think about, what are your goals on social media? Because being beat up by the public, and I'll tell you, it's my number one pet peeve because I'm like, these are 18, 19-year-old kids,
Yeah.
right? These are
You-
not NFL people, like at this point, they're not getting paid millions of dollars. Like, just
They're
pipe down. This is
kids.
a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So the
Yeah.
pressure is enormous. And now with NIL, there's even more pressure to look a certain way, not just perform on the field or court or pool or whatever, but you also have to perform socially, get your following up. That'll get you a better NIL deal. And that is a lot,
A lot. Mm-hmm.
Man, that is overwhelming. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And especially relating back to the identity conversation we were just having, I feel like that's even more pressure on your personal
Right.
identity, right? Because then
Mm-hmm.
you're putting on this constant show for people of,
Yeah.
this is who I'm trying to be, this is who I'm portraying all of the time. How do you
Right.
help someone manage, not only that, also not finding their identity solely in just what they do on the field?
Mm-hmm.
How
Mm-hmm.
do you help them
Well,
balance going elsewhere and finding other things?
right. So sometimes we go back to childhood. Well, before you got so intensely involved in whatever the sport is, what else did you like to do? And oftentimes they'll say, oh, I love to draw,
Mhm.
or something like that. And you find out that really this person has, I mean, I think it doesn't matter if it's talent or not, but oftentimes they're very talented in that way, or they say I love to read or I love to do this thing, and so really starting to encourage that and reinforce that and help them understand that again, this life in sport is going to end in very, ultimately sometime. We
Mhm.
even had an intern here who had spent, I think he'd spent like 13 years in the NFL, and when he got out of football, he came back to get his counseling degree, but his true passion was golf. And he found golf, and wow, that man was obsessed with golf.
Mhm.
But he found something he loved, and that's the important piece.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
I do want to touch on eating disorders.
Hmm.
Um, I work in strength and conditioning, but we've also been able to work with a lot of people in nutritional counseling. And we
Hmm.
deal with people, we deal with healthy people, people that
Hmm.
want either it's an athlete, it's like I want to learn to eat better to feel my body better. Um, it could just be general population people that just want to lose a little couple pounds and feel better. But because I've worked in strength and conditioning, um, and because we do counsel people just on general performance nutrition, me and Gray have both run into conversations with parents and students where there is a concern that my child has an eating disorder. And
Hmm.
first and foremost, that is not what we do. We don't do
Hmm.
that. We send those people
Right, right,
out.
right.
We that is not, I am not qualified to do that, and I don't even act like it.
Mhm.
Um,
Hmm.
and I have been in situations where I've heard a mom or a dad come to me and they'll describe to me what is a eating disorder. And I'll say, well, I think it'd probably be a good idea to go talk to some counseling and maybe go talk to a registered dietitian.
Hmm.
And the
Hmm.
mom or the dad will immediately go, well, they're just healthy. That's not an eating disorder. And you're
Hmm.
like,
Hmm.
and you're like, you don't press it. But in my mind, I go, no, that's an eating disorder.
Mhm.
Hmm.
That's
Hmm.
an eating disorder. And
Right.
the parents are just not hearing it. Oh, well, it can't be my
Hmm.
daughter. It's not going to be my daughter. She just wants to
Hmm.
eat healthy. Well, it couldn't be,
Right.
she's just picky. But what they are
Right.
describing,
We eat clean in our family.
yes.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And what I have found before is that mom or that dad themselves has a history.
Mhm.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
right?
that's not
Definitely.
even uncommon
And
anymore.
that's just scary. Can you talk a little bit about the prevalence of eating disorders in athletes? A little bit about how the pressure of performance can
Hmm.
affect that, and just what trends you've seen with eating disorders
Hmm.
in athletes. Because what you told me on the phone was, and I was talking about girls, and you go, whoa, whoa, we see men
Hmm.
with the same
Hmm.
issues. It's not the same number, but it's men too. Can you talk a little bit about
Right.
where we're at currently with eating disorders in young athletes, male or female?
Right. Well, part of what we think about, or the way that we think about it, is okay, there are eating disorders and there is disordered eating. So there are certainly people that have gotten something in their mind about how they're supposed to eat or not eat, that for them it doesn't make sense. So let me give you an easy example. So oftentimes what happens is someone will take a rule somewhere, they've heard a food rule. Okay, you're not supposed to eat after 6 p.m. Y'all have heard this, right?
Oh,
Yeah, but that rule is intended for people who probably are in the obesity and above range, who are people that have their dinner and they sit down and they start eating throughout the whole evening, right? That is a behavioral control rule for people who don't know how to stop eating it, when they're full. It is not intended for an athlete, because athletes are hungry at night and they need to be eating, they need to be fueling. So what happens is there's all kinds of these kind of I don't even know what I would call them, but we'll just say food rules that people follow without understanding what the rationale behind that is. So that one in particular is completely inappropriate for an athlete, and yet we oftentimes hear it. So we have an amazing registered dietitian who is highly trained in sport nutrition in particular. And, she can help them break down. No, you have to be fueling your body at this point, this point, and this point. And, a lot of them get up early and they have workouts, or they have weight room, or they have something like that. And they think, oh, well, I just jump out of bed and I go. She's like, no, no, no. You have to have some fuel. You've been, the last 8 probably hours without fuel, if not longer. You have to have something to be able to do that workout. So breaking all of those eating myths is extremely important. Um, Here, we tend to think of it, there's a term we use in athletics called RED S, which is relative energy deficiency in sport. So every athlete has a different nutritional demand, different calorie level or energy level of demand. Some of the highest demand are swimmers and, believe it or not, beach volleyball.
I believe
In
it.
addition, of course, yeah, in addition, of course, to football. But then you've got people like equestrians, or you have, just some other sports that maybe their demand looks different. And so our dietitian will evaluate them and help them come up with a program that works for them, because it is not a one size fits all by any means for anyone.
What is the steps of identifying if you have disordered eating? Which I agree. Like, I think the comment we talked about is like, maybe there's a athlete that wants to lose a little bit of weight, and then her mom goes, "Oh, just quit eating carbs." That's what
Hmm.
I did.
Hmm.
And you're like, "Well, I'm
Hmm.
sorry, you're an athlete. You need carbs."
Right.
Yes, that's
Right.
disordered eating. How do you
Hmm.
differentiate that between somebody you have that comes into your office and you're like, "Okay, this is an eating disorder."
Well, we have the diagnostic criteria for anorexia nervosa and bulimia nervosa, right? So we have the diagnostic criteria that we can go through, pardon me, and check off and see, do they fit the criteria? Or, I hope you're editing this.
I got mine too. Don't worry about it. No, we're good.
Right. Or does the family have a whole lot of food rules, and parents are part of the dieting culture, perhaps, maybe even grandparents. And, we follow whatever the latest, craziest diet is, or we go from not eating protein to not eating carbs, or, now we're on a fruit fast or something like that. And, just things that do not make sense for our athletes. And I'm sorry, I forgot your question.
No, it's just how do you identify? No, it's okay. No, like how do you obviously you have a diagnostic tool. You answered that for if they're bulimia or
Hmm.
anorexia. I
Hmm.
guess my question is, are you seeing a prevalence of increase in that? What leads to the athletes usually? Um, I had a pretty tough example years ago with an athlete that was an out of state athlete, so I don't want anybody to think it was a Gamecock that came and trained with me in the summer. Um, and she said, "Well, my coach is starting to comment on my weight, and I'm concerned I'm going to lose my spot if I don't lose weight."
Right.
And
Well,
this,
we have a rule that coaches cannot comment on people's weight, period. And they
yes,
cannot give nutrition advice or make,
mhm,
helpful suggestions about, um, you something that they think needs to happen with someone's weight. Or I'm going to knock on wood and say that doesn't happen in our shop.
yeah, okay. I love that there's
That's
a rule there.
awesome.
Yeah, I love that
Hmm.
there's a rule there
Hmm.
because I think that pressure on performance, that pressure on keeping your spot, um, listen, social media, girls already see what they're supposed to look like on social media from,
Supposed to,
yes, from
right?
people that
Air
don't even
quotes.
look like that, right?
Right,
Um,
right.
there's already pressure within their friends groups.
Hmm.
Social media kills self-esteem. I truly feel that. And
Oh, there's
now,
tons of research
is there
that
really?
says that,
Is there really?
particularly in girls.
Is there
Yes.
really?
Hmm.
And if you're a female athlete, now it's like, well, not only do I have to like look this way for my peer group and social media, now I got to look this way for my coach. Now I got to do this because, all the pressures of my weight. No wonder, right?
Hmm.
No wonder
Right.
we struggle with young girls and eating disorders. What can parents do?
Well, I think that parents need to continue to have conversations, and that and in part examine their own values and what they're talking about. So it's not uncommon for a middle-aged mom to say negative things about her own body or about other people.
Oh, what a
Oh, have you
great
seen
point.
her? Woo, she's really packed on the pounds this winter, right? that kind of thing. Or,
And the kid
oh, well, you got to
internalizes
watch
that,
out.
right? The kid
Yes,
hears
they
that.
do.
The
Yes,
kid
they
hears
do.
that
And
and
they
they make the
go,
mental note of, oh, mom's making fun of people that are a little overweight. I better make sure I'm never
right,
overweight.
right. And
Wow.
so, what about me? Or parents talk about, you got to be careful about that freshman 15, blah, blah, blah. Um, yeah, so all of those things are grist for the mill, if you will.
You know, I I'm gonna call myself out on this. Okay. Um, Me and Gray have had this common conversation before that in the fitness industry, there's body dysmorphia, right? In our
Oh,
industry, there is it's I've caught myself doing it, right? And I'm gonna call myself out on something that I know I've done and my wife has talked to me about is I've pulled up my shirt and been like, I'm starting to lose my abs. And my kid will be there. And I'm like, I gotta watch what I eat. Like just talking to her, like I gotta get my abs.
yep.
And my wife told me one day, Asher, my little boy, pulled his stomach up and goes, Mommy, do I have abs?
Mhm.
And I'm like, and my wife told me that. And when I tell you, I felt like the worst dad. And I didn't even realize what I was doing. I didn't even realize
Sure.
what I was saying. My intention was not
Right.
that. But she's like, hey, he watches you and he sees you. And you start making comments, you're doing two things. One, you're saying that you want abs. You don't like it when you're getting abs, and the solution is to eat less when you don't have abs. He goes, so he hears all those three things. You affirmed with abs. You noticed when you didn't have it, and you just said, "This is the solution." And she's like, he came up to me one day, and he was getting ready to get in the bath, and he looked in the mirror, and he goes, "But mommy, do I have abs?" And he's 8. He's
Right.
8. And when
Right.
I tell you, I had a total parent check that we don't talk about it anymore. You know what we talk
Mhm.
about? Eating, going out to exercise, going for walks in the sun,
To
making health,
reframe.
making to reframe it around
Mhm.
making healthy food
Mhm.
choices, making sure we're eating breakfast. Because when I
Mhm.
did that, and I didn't even realize I was saying it, I was actually shocked she said something. I got a little bit defensive at first, right? You naturally get
Of course you
defensive.
did.
Yeah, because I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm not talking about that. That's dumb. Like, whatever, right? And then when she leaves the room, I'm like, oh, awful. And
Mhm.
that's a dad thing. And you bring up such a great point that the kids hear.
Mhm.
They hear
Right.
the
Well,
coach, even the coach saying, God, let's make sure this girl doesn't come back from summer and show up to workouts 20 pounds heavy.
mhm.
Man,
Mhm.
that's a really good point.
I don't
Well,
know.
and even let me just
Yes.
even the healthy food, what? Not healthy
Yeah.
food,
Yeah. Right.
Mhm.
because
Right.
food is food and it's
Yes.
okay. You can have birthday cake and ice cream. That doesn't blow anything, but we have this black and white mentality around food. My other pet peeve is eating clean. That
Mhm.
just like about pushes me over the edge because what does that mean?
It's a
And
label
what are you setting up? Well, and what are you setting up in your kid's brain about that,
that there's
right?
there are foods they should never eat.
Mhm.
Now you're already in the.
Because they're
Wow, I'm putting together the math for
dirty,
it. Yes.
because they're dirty,
Dirty
because
food.
that's
Right.
the opposite of clean,
Yeah.
right?
And now they're already restricting. Now
Mhm.
they're already forming those restricting habits. Now it's the bad food. Or
And right.
here's what else I see. I see the over exercise.
Mhm.
Hmm.
I see
Hmm.
the guys and the girls who are like, well, I ate pizza last night, so I got to do an hour on the treadmill,
Mhm.
almost like a form of
Right.
punishment, or like I got to
Mhm.
do
Hmm.
extra. And that
Hmm.
starts going down that hill. And man, once
Right.
that stops, these girls can't stop it.
Yeah,
These
it's a
boys can't
slippery
stop it.
slope.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Mhm.
For
Um,
sure.
God, that's really true. As our last question, and
Hmm.
I always frame this from a parent watching, understanding that athletes are going to watch kids. I've had kids
Hmm.
at my school sometimes like, Coach, watch your podcast. I'm like, crap, I hope I didn't swear. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, oh no. Um,
Like you
um,
weren't supposed to see that.
yeah. I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa.
Which
Parents that are
ones?
Yeah.
parents that are watching this, can you give any final little bit of advice if there's a parent watching this? Um, Even if it's a parenting tip, a psychology tip. Like you said, you've had kids that do it, that played sports. Can you leave our parents with a little bit of advice to help navigate their kids from a mental health standpoint? Not even for sports, because like you said, you've done family counseling. Can you
Hmm.
give us
Hmm.
just a broad family tip? And I'm going to be the one that probably pays attention to
Hmm.
this the most as we raise our children.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I guess I would give you one that's maybe arguably two, which is to keep talking to your kids, to be a part of their inner life, to
Mm,
do the kinds of things that help a kid get comfortable, not feel criticized or judged for what they said, but so that they can talk these things out loud. And a lot of that is about remaining curious with them. A simple example is, a kid's listening to some, let's say profane rap music and you don't like it, right?
hmm hmm
You have two choices. You can say, turn that crap off and
Okay.
start a fight with them because they're gonna listen, right? They're already listening. They're already doing this.
hmm
Or you can say, wow, what is it about that you are interested in? What about that is appealing? Why do you like that particular song? Well, what do you think about how he's talking about women in
mm
this,
mm mm
And to stay curious
mm
and to keep that dialogue open with your kids.
Love that.
about anything,
But
about food, exercise, body,
Mhm.
music, whatever, friends, teachers, learning, whatever.
I mean, you just with that simple question, you've already made your kid have this like internal thought process of all of these different things that have affected them. And it could be that profane rap song,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Right, right.
that's
Mm-hmm.
that's mind
And
blowing. Just the
right. And so they
conversation.
may say, well, I love that. Like, I'm interested in drums. Can you hear that drum in there? And it's
Hmm.
really
Oh
great, blah, blah,
yeah.
blah. And they may say, I wasn't even listening to the words. What does
Mm-hmm.
that
Hmm.
mean? What does it mean?
Mm.
And
Hmm.
if you're open to tell them, well, this is what it means, they may go, oh my gosh,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so then you can say, I think, it's something that we should be careful about, where we spend our time and energy and what we're listening to and what we're putting in our brains and our bodies
Hmm.
or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and if you're not criticizing them or telling them to turn it off, what you're doing is transferring the responsibility to them, right? So
Mm.
now the kid is like, oh, ooh, I don't think I like that. They get to make their own decision, which is ultimately what we should be training them for,
Wow.
right? And that they are going to say, you know what? I don't think I want to listen to that anymore. And you could say, yeah, there's other options, and there's some great drummers out there, and there's some amazing rappers that
Hmm.
have really good things to say
Yeah.
rather
Yeah.
than putting women down, you know?
Yeah.
I feel like
That's
yelling at them causes some shame a little bit,
Oh, of
right?
course it
And then what
does.
they're gonna
or
do is
Absolutely.
they're gonna listen to it when
re
you're not home or
it's
with their
It's
rebellion.
going to
Or
go,
yeah.
they're going to
Hmm.
go underground,
They're
right?
gonna
yeah.
go
Because they're
yeah,
going to
yeah.
listen.
Yeah, they're gonna
Yeah.
go underground with it and they're gonna go to their friend's house whose mom lets them do it or they're gonna do it when you're not around or they're gonna have headphones on and I don't
Yep.
want it to lead to shame. So
Hmm.
I
Right.
I think that's
Right.
great. I think having conversations is great. Anything else? You said there was two.
Whew,
I can't remember. I
this
can't
was
remember.
like an
I know.
exam.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, no,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the second part was to be curious, to
Okay.
remain
Hmm.
curious with your
Okay.
Yeah.
child, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
hmm
I
Um,
love it.
I thank you very much for coming on. I always want to be respectful of your time and be honest when I say, "Hey, we'll be off by this time." I always want to stick to that because you got things to do too. Thank you. One, thank you. I know I've had a lot of kids that I've known and had relationships that go to South Carolina, and it makes me
hmm
and play sports, and it
hmm
makes me very comfortable to know that there is this service for them because
hmm
I didn't know it was there. I wonder how
Yeah.
many other parents don't know it's there. Other
Yeah, a
coaches
lot of
don't know
parents.
it's there. They don't
Hmm.
know it's there. Um,
hmm
so being able to be part of the community is important. Thank you for coming on. Like I said, I was nervous at first to be like, oh, she's probably so busy she don't want to talk to us. But
No, I love
yeah,
this. hmm
thank you very much for coming on. If we ever wanted to do like a part two on something more precise, would you be willing to come on? Okay.
Absolutely.
That'd
Okay.
be awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you very much for coming on and we'll talk
Yeah.
soon again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You are very welcome. Nice to meet you both, Gray and Josh.
With all due respect.
Hey, we're Josh Ortegan and Grey Gaines, and this is With All Due Respect, the show where we keep it real about health, fitness, and performance. From weight loss to sports development, we're covering the conversations that matter.
Follow us on Instagram at Phenom Fitness, PHNM Fitness, and visit www.phenomfit.com to check out our training programs, coaching, and gear built for real results. Let's get into it.